Imagine pulling into your driveway after a 14-hour court shift to find your $50,000 Mercedes gone. Now picture your HOA president smirking from her window as she silently texts the tow company. This isn't just about stolen cars, it's about a criminal empire built on forged documents, midnight tows, and neighbors too terrified to fight back. By sunrise, I'd transform from victim to judge, jury, and executioner of the corruption poisoning our neighborhood. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. Because as you'll see today, not every homeowners association is the friendly neighborhood watch it claims to be. My judicial robes still smelled like stale courtroom coffee when I stumbled out of the rental car, tie crooked, exhausted from that 14-hour shift. The sun had set an hour ago, leaving the streetlights casting long shadows across Oakwood Estates. Perfectly trimmed hedges and lawns lined each house, all maintained under the eagle-eyed oversight of our newly appointed HOA president, Margaret Winters. But as I stepped onto my driveway, something felt wrong. The concrete was bare. No sign of my silver Mercedes, a car I'd saved 5 years to buy. Why would a reliable, registered, and properly parked car suddenly vanish? Why was Margaret peering at me from her second-story window with that self-satisfied grin? I felt my heart pound. I'd seen my share of conspiracies and bizarre cases from the bench, but never suspected my own car could be a target. Yet here I was, keys in hand, staring at the empty space my Mercedes once occupied. Was it stolen in broad daylight? Or towed for some outlandish HOA infraction? The worst part was not knowing which scenario fit Margaret's twisted brand of neighborhood standards. I hurried to my front door, half expecting another bombshell. Sure enough, a neon orange notice was taped crookedly over the doorbell. It bore Margaret's flourished signature and some ridiculous claim that my courthouse parking permit sticker violated a new no commercial vehicle rule. My mind spun. How could a simple permit transform my personal car into a commercial fleet? A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, approached with caution. She wore gardening clothes streaked with dirt, as if she'd been outside all day. Her eyes flicked to Margaret's window before she whispered, "Judge Anderson, they came at 3 a.m. Took your car in under 5 minutes. Margaret was out there directing them. She threatened me with fines if I tried to stop them." My hands shook as I flipped through the violation notice. Commercial vehicle? My beloved Mercedes? Why would Margaret invent such a rule out of thin air? And more importantly, what was she getting out of it? Then my phone buzzed, a text from Ted Rodriguez, who lived across the street. "Check your security cameras. You need to see what really happened." Why would Ted say it like that? Was it just the tow, or was there something else captured on camera? Inside, I nearly tripped over the pile of violation notices shoved under my door. Multiple warnings, all for different nonsensical infractions. Unauthorized professional vehicle storage, displaying government credentials without HOA approval, and a final threat referencing some immediate removal authority. None of these matched the original bylaws I'd seen over the years. I logged into my security system and began scrolling through the footage from 2 nights ago. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., when a tow truck, headlights off, rolled up to my driveway like a thief in the night. My stomach churned at the sight of Margaret Winters in designer pajamas and pearls, personally directing the tow operator as if choreographing a show. But then I saw something more chilling. A sleek black BMW pulled up, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit. He and Margaret pointed at my car, laughing. Even with grainy night vision, I could see the familial resemblance. This had to be Margaret's brother-in-law, owner of a used car dealership with an unsavory reputation. What were they talking about at that hour? Why did they look so triumphant taking my property? In that moment, a single question echoed in my head. If Margaret could do this to me, a judge, what was she doing to everyone else? My doorbell rang. It was Ted Rodriguez, looking more anxious than ever. He glanced back, clearly worried about who might be watching. "Judge Anderson," he said quietly, "you need to see this." He showed me a video he'd recorded at the community pool, where Margaret strutted around in heels and her trademark pearl necklace, bragging about towing vehicles she deemed unsightly. She specifically mentioned a single mother's grocery delivery van and an elderly widow's Buick. Each time, she'd wave a receipt from the tow company like a trophy. Why would she do this so brazenly? Did she think no one would question her? Or was she counting on people being too intimidated by HOA politics? Ted swallowed hard. I've been watching her for weeks. She's got a pattern. Mostly new residents, minority families, or anyone who dares to disagree at HOA meetings. He then pulled out a second video, Margaret meeting with that same man in the suit behind our clubhouse. They flipped through photos of cars pointing at each one, then the man scribbled checks. My phone buzzed again, a reminder from the courthouse about my new appointment, supervising judge for civil property cases. The irony hit me hard. On one hand, I'd see countless property disputes pass through my courtroom. On the other, I was now a victim of a scheme that smelled like organized fraud. Just then, a tearful Sarah Chen showed up, explaining that Margaret had seized her grandmother's car, her only transportation to dialysis appointments. The thought of a sweet elderly neighbor losing her car over neighborhood standards felt nauseating. I looked outside. Margaret was there, swaggering down the street with a clipboard, pausing at each driveway as though evaluating a painting in a gallery. She had no idea her unstoppable power trip was about to collide with a far greater force. Would she still be smirking once a judge started asking questions? I pulled up the county auction records for my Mercedes. Sure enough, it had been sold for $1,200 to a dealership I'd never heard of, Winters Premium Auto. An alarm bell sounded in my head. Margaret's last name was Winters, so it wasn't a stretch to connect the dots. Her brother-in-law likely owned this dealership. An old friend at the county clerk's office, Susan, confirmed my suspicions by forwarding related documents. 6 other cars from Oakwood Estates had been sold the same way, each for a fraction of its market value, each purchased by the same dealership. Mrs. Chen's beloved late husband's vintage Corvette, the Garcia family's work van, Dr. Patel's Tesla, all vanished, all under the pretense of violations. Mrs. Chen arrived at my house clutching threatening letters from Margaret. They were full of legal jargon, referencing liens and property seizures if she dared complain. The poor woman's hands trembled. Margaret's intimidation tactics had been effective. Most neighbors complied out of fear. But now, with Ted's investigative instincts and my legal know-how, we had a chance to put the puzzle together. Why was Margaret doing this? Was it all about money and property value, or was there a bigger plan? Then, an ominous line in the bylaws caught my attention. Immediate removal authority. Nowhere in the legitimate HOA bylaws did that phrase exist. Someone had doctored the official documents. The question was, how many other sections had Margaret rewritten to facilitate her midnight towing spree? Ted came back later that evening with snapshots from a hidden lot behind Winters Premium Auto. Rows of cars were lined up for out-of-state shipment. Mrs. Chen's Corvette was among them, wearing the disabled veteran plate from her late husband. Another neighbor's minivan, wheels removed and interior stripped, was set to be sold for parts. Fear boiled into anger. This wasn't just petty HOA power, this was organized crime. And Margaret's self-righteous stance about maintaining property values was nothing but a facade. Outside, a trembling Margaret continued slapping new violation notices on driveways. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if she sensed someone collecting evidence. She didn't realize we already had enough proof to build a rock-solid case. That night, a small group gathered in my living room. Mrs. Chen, the Garcia family, Ted, and 2 more neighbors whose cars had been suspiciously seized. I opened my laptop, showing them Margaret's texts recorded through my phone's directional mic. James, move these cars out of state ASAP. Too many questions from that judge. She had no idea her own words could seal her fate. If Margaret believed she could hide behind forged paperwork, she was about to learn how serious things get when you cross both state lines and a federal judge. We decided to confront Margaret in broad daylight at a special HOA meeting. I requested the use of the community center, something Margaret approved grudgingly, likely suspecting we'd try to challenge her. She had no clue how much evidence we already had or that law enforcement would be standing by. The next morning I rose before dawn, pulling together documents, security footage, and statements from 6 victims. Ted brought his own trove of investigative files, including a potential link to other HOAs running similar schemes. My hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Part of me wanted to keep calm the way I would in court, but another part wanted to see Margaret squirm. Why was she so confident nobody would fight back? Did she think her personal wealth and intimidation tactics would silence an entire neighborhood? The community center buzzed with hushed conversations as the crowd grew. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, a stack of old photographs of her stolen Corvette in hand. The Garcia family hovered near the doorway, arms folded, uncertain if they'd really get justice. Even Dr. Patel, who rarely had time away from the hospital, made it a point to attend. Margaret swept in 5 minutes late, wearing a brand new Gucci dress and heels that probably cost as much as my monthly mortgage. Behind her, a smug-looking man in a tailored suit. Her brother-in-law, no doubt, tried to slip in discreetly. But half the room recognized him instantly, pointing and whispering. Margaret clicked her expensive pen against the lectern. Let's make this quick. Some of us have dinner reservations. I rose, letting my judicial credentials rest visibly against my blouse. Actually, Margaret, I said evenly, this won't be quick. We have quite a bit to discuss. The tension was palpable. Why did Margaret look so rattled at the sight of my ID? Was it dawning on her that her new victim was more than just a tired homeowner? I connected my laptop to the projector, scanning the room as I loaded the security footage of my Mercedes being towed at 3:17 a.m. A hush fell as the screen lit up with crisp, time-stamped video. There was Margaret, in pajamas and pearls, excitedly guiding the tow operator. She even took selfies, tangible proof that she didn't care about being discreet. Here's what happened 2 weeks ago, I said, voice echoing off the cinder block walls. Take note of the timestamp 3:17 a.m. And now, let's compare that to Section 72 of our legitimate HOA bylaws. I clicked again, revealing the original text, which specified a 30-day notice and only daytime towing under specific circumstances. Margaret sneered. These vehicles violated our updated bylaws. I have every right. I cut her off by pulling up side-by-side images. The real bylaws from the county recorder and Margaret's doctored version. Gasps erupted from the residents. Paragraphs about immediate removal and commercial vehicle bans were nowhere in the original. Then I turned to face Margaret. Which exact rule did you use to tow Mrs. Chen's Corvette or Dr. Patel's Tesla? I switched slides, displaying their auction listings. Each car had been sold to Winter's Premium Auto for a fraction of its real value. Margaret's brother-in-law, who'd been inching toward the exit, saw Ted casually blocking the door. Was he trying to flee? Did he realize the gig was up? Just as the room reached peak chaos, neighbors shouting, Margaret struggling to retort, Ted cleared his throat. Folks, he began, pulling a press badge from his jacket. I'm Ted Rodriguez, investigative reporter for Channel 7 News. I've spent months following an HOA car theft ring, and it leads straight to our neighborhood. He displayed a slideshow. Photos of lots behind Winter's Premium Auto, pictures of Margaret receiving checks, bank statements linking her personal account to suspicious shell corporations. The color drained from Margaret's face. She'd spent months lording over us, forging documents and threatening fines, only to discover she was now under a microscope. Look here, Ted continued, zooming in on a restaurant receipt. Margaret had met with other HOA heads across the county, apparently teaching them how to create bogus rules and conduct overnight tows. Each lesson was accompanied by a hefty consulting fee. Margaret's facade cracked. She glared at Ted, then at me, her pen tapping furiously on the lectern. You don't understand, she hissed. I'm maintaining property values. These people park junkers in front of million-dollar homes. You towed a nurse's car because she works the night shift. I shot back, voice now tinged with anger. You threatened an 80-year-old widow and took her only transportation. Where's the concern for property values in that? Ted clicked to a map dotted with red circles. Each represented a seized vehicle across multiple counties and states. The pattern was shocking. Low-income areas, retirement communities, neighborhoods with a high concentration of immigrants. Margaret and her network specifically targeted those who were least likely to fight back. Mrs. Chen stood, voice trembling. That Corvette belonged to my late husband. He was a disabled veteran. We had all our paperwork and permits. But Margaret claimed it was some kind of neighborhood eyesore. A hush fell. Everyone knew the Corvette was old but meticulously maintained. It was the pride of Mrs. Chen's family. Margaret tried to gather her composure. These vehicles were in violation. I have every right to enforce. Enforce what? I interrupted, clicking again. Up came bank records showing large deposits into Margaret's personal account right after each car auction. You can't hide behind petty fines or made-up bylaws when there's a clear money trail. Why had she taken selfies if she knew this was illegal? Why risk an electronic trail of text messages? Maybe she was so drunk on power she believed she was untouchable. At that point, my phone vibrated with a text from a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division. They were outside, ready to move if we gave the signal. Over the past week, I'd been sending them evidence to confirm Margaret's multi-state fraud. They'd found enough to charge her under federal law, particularly once the cars crossed state lines. Margaret's phone chirped with incoming notifications. Maybe she sensed the net closing in. She made a desperate attempt to leave, but Ted and a few neighbors blocked her path. Cameras from local news stations began rolling. They'd been tipped off and were waiting for a story. The crowd parted as I walked up to Margaret. "We have all the evidence we need, including your text messages and the altered bylaws. You can blame whoever you want, but it's over." The moment hung in the air. Margaret's eyes darted around, searching for an exit or an ally. None appeared. Did she finally realize she'd picked the wrong resident to bully? Margaret's carefully curated world collapsed in seconds. FBI agents strode into the community center, badges out, reading her rights. She sputtered denials and half-formed excuses. I didn't write those bylaws. My brother-in-law, he's the one. I was just..." Behind her, a commotion erupted as her brother-in-law attempted a last-minute dash out the back door. Another agent caught him easily. Neighbors cheered or sighed in relief. Some clapped, others wept. Mrs. Chen watched from the front row, tears streaming down her face. I could almost feel the wave of catharsis in that room. So many people finally free to speak, no longer living in fear of fines, liens, or losing their vehicles. As they led Margaret away, the bright overhead lights cast unflattering shadows on her expensive dress. No more pearl necklaces or designer bags would save her from the legal consequences now. Would she spend her prison term still ranting about property values? Or would the reality of her crimes finally sink in? Within hours, local news stations broadcasted the footage, and calls flooded the FBI hotline. Victims from other states recognized Margaret's face. They too had lost cars under suspicious circumstances. Some had never recovered from the financial blow, forced to move, lose jobs, or give up caregiving roles because they had no transportation. The scale of the damage was heartbreaking. That evening, the news vans parked along our quiet streets, and reporters interviewed neighbors who recounted Margaret's bullying tactics. A single mother tearfully described how her only means of delivering groceries for work had been towed without warning. An elderly man with a mobility scooter told how Margaret threatened to fine him for improperly stored equipment. Meanwhile, the FBI discovered a hidden office at Winter's Premium Auto stacked with records, scanned driver's licenses, registration documents, and backdated towing notices. It was a gold mine of evidence. Investigators realized that for every stolen car in Oakwood Estates, there were 2 or 3 more in neighboring communities. People often think HOAs just fuss over lawn height and fence colors. Nobody expected an elaborate scheme pulling in millions from stolen vehicles. But in letting her greed run wild, Margaret had left a massive paper trail, overshadowed only by the families she destroyed in her pursuit of profit. The day of Margaret's arraignment, I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. It felt surreal. I was used to presiding in cases like these, not providing testimony as a victim. But seeing Margaret brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, was a stark reminder of how quickly life can turn when you decide you're above the law. Her brother-in-law stood at the defense table, trembling. He'd tried to destroy documents before the FBI arrived, but they'd recovered the shredded pieces. There was no escaping the paper trail. People from all over filled the gallery. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Patel, the Garcia family, and folks who drove in from neighboring states. One by one, they told stories of how they discovered their cars missing, how they received bizarre violation notices, and how Margaret's threats had forced them into silence. Some lost jobs. Others had to rely on expensive rideshare services just to make a living. Margaret's lawyer attempted to paint her as a misunderstood HOA president, claiming she was overzealous but not criminal. The evidence told a different story: altered bylaws, doctored minutes from fake HOA votes, personal checks from the dealership, and plenty of text messages where Margaret bragged about cleaning up the neighborhood. At one point, Margaret tried to speak, but her voice cracked. There was no apology, only repeated attempts to blame her brother-in-law or some mythical compliance department. She seemed incapable of admitting her own wrongdoing. When sentencing finally arrived, I wasn't the judge on the bench. That role fell to a colleague. But I did take the stand to detail the facts of my missing Mercedes and how I'd discovered the entire operation. The judge, known for a no-nonsense approach to fraud, delivered the sentence with measured calm: 15 years for Margaret in federal prison, 10 years for her brother-in-law. Restitution mandated, every single victim would be compensated. If their cars were still missing, money would be returned for the full market value plus damages. Property liens, if placed, would be voided. The courtroom erupted in something akin to cautious applause. People hugged, tears flowed, and relief washed over those who'd been living in anxiety. I looked at Margaret, head bowed, face pale, a far cry from the arrogant woman who once measured grass blades for fines. As the bailiffs led her away, I thought of all the other HOAs across the country who might be pulling similar stunts. How many neighbors caved to intimidation, convinced they had no legal recourse? My new role as supervising judge for civil property cases would give me the chance to tackle such problems on a wider scale, ensuring stories like Margaret's ended far sooner. Days later, an even stranger development occurred. My Mercedes turned up 3 states away, sold to a family of 5 who had no idea it was stolen property. They'd bought it at what they thought was a legitimate auction for a steal of a price. I had the legal right to reclaim it, but after hearing their story, a father laid off, a mother working double shifts, 3 children in need of daily transport, I decided to let them keep the car. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Some people called me generous, others thought I was foolish to give up such an expensive vehicle. But every time I remembered Margaret's smirk and her repeated claims about property values, I knew I made the right call. The real victory was dismantling her scam, not recovering a car I could always replace. Mrs. Chen united with her late husband's beloved vintage Corvette. The FBI had found it on a truck bound for Nevada, with only minor changes made to hide its origin. Seeing her weep tears of joy was worth more than any car I'd ever owned. In the wake of Margaret's downfall, Oakwood Estates had a massive shakeup. Our beloved former president, Mr. Johnson, who'd been mysteriously forced out by Margaret, returned to help reorganize the board. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Washington, another neighbor Margaret targeted, stepped up to rewrite the bylaws correctly, ensuring no single person could impose new rules without a community vote. We now had transparent procedures for vehicle violations, actual 30-day notices, a proper hearing process, and multiple warnings before towing. The aim was to protect both neighbors and property values, not bully people into submission. Looking around the neighborhood, I noticed the tension had lifted. People parked without fear, greeted each other with friendly waves, and found reasons to be outside again. The aura of paranoia Margaret had cultivated dissolved. Once a month, we hold a community meeting, and there's always a bittersweet laugh when someone mentions Margaret. We remind ourselves how quickly power can corrupt if not kept in check. We also celebrate the transformation that happens when people stand together, refusing to be intimidated. I sometimes catch myself looking at the empty space in my driveway, where my Mercedes used to sit, and reflecting on the chain of events that took down a criminal enterprise. Who would have thought that a mere parking permit sticker could expose forged bylaws, elaborate kickbacks, and cross-state theft rings? But the real lesson is that rules only bind us until we decide to rewrite them. Margaret tried to wield the HOA guidelines like a personal sledgehammer, forging them to serve her greed. She never considered that one of her neighbors might possess both a judicial background and the courage to challenge her. All the legal procedures and evidence gathering were worth it to see families like the Chens, Garcias, and Patels get closure. This outcome wasn't stolen Mercedes or an arrogant HOA president. It was about restoring faith that justice can prevail, even against those who believe themselves untouchable. A few weeks after Margaret's sentencing, Ted Rodriguez knocked on my door. He was wrapping up his big investigative piece for Channel 7, spanning 3 states, multiple HOAs, and interviewing victims from all walks of life. He'd become something of a folk hero around Oakwood Estates, the reporter who saved a neighborhood from tyranny. "Judge Anderson," he said with a grin, "care to give a final statement for my report?" I thought for a moment, recalling all the heartbreak, relief, and triumph we'd collectively experienced. "Tell your viewers that no matter how ironclad a bully thinks their rules are, there's always a higher law, and the truth has a funny way of surfacing when good people refuse to stay silent." Ted nodded, scribbling the note. He then showed me a photograph he planned to include, a shot of Margaret being led away in handcuffs. Her eyes were wide, as if she only realized in that instant how fragile her empire had been. As for me, I bought a new car, nothing too flashy, but comfortable enough for the days I still have late-night court sessions. I park it in the garage now, more out of habit than fear. Every so often, I see that empty patch of driveway and remember the night this all began. How a missing Mercedes led to unraveling a web of corruption. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. You never know how a single injustice, like a stolen car, can be the catalyst for exposing fraud that runs deeper than anyone suspected. All it takes is someone willing to ask questions, stand up for their neighbors, and, when necessary, wield the power of the law to protect those who need it most. Information in this video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community.